Today we're going to talk about how anyone can be a developer. When people ask me what I do and I tell them I'm a developer, quite a lot of the time they'll respond with something like, that's not something I could do, or that involves a lot of science and maths, and I was never very good at that at school, or it's not something I could do. And that's just not the case. So I think first things first, let's dispel some myths. A lot of people think you need to have maths knowledge, and don't get me wrong, things like logical operators helps knowing those kind of things, but that is very much a small piece of maths. It's things like, if I do something and I do something else, that those two things need to both be done, otherwise this logic isn't going to work. That's about as complicated as it gets. Obviously you get things like multiplication if you're, adding some prices of things in a basket, but most of the time that's not what you have. It's not a problem at all. And hell, you've got a computer to do that for you. You're just putting together the mathematical equation. You're not doing the actual maths itself. Other than that though, there's very little maths actually involved in programming, especially day to day. People also think that you need a lot of IT knowledge to work in programming. And again, that is just not the case. It helps to know certain things, like as a front-end web developer, it helps to know some things like the terminal. But it's not required, and it's definitely something that you can learn on the job and you don't need to do to start off with. Even then, you don't necessarily need to know the terminal. It's not particularly useful if you're developing in C# on a Windows machine. People also think that you need to know Linux. Node, for example, is probably a bit easier to do in Linux and on the terminal. But again, that's not a requirement, and even for a Windows machine where you don't really have the terminal, you can still get around that using the Ubuntu subsystems, or even just the command line. That's assuming you even develop using the terminal. I guess the key is it's a personal preference. You can pick what tools you want to use, and that's kind of what makes development so cool and so interesting. When I first started out, I was developing C# and Visual Studio. Now I'm a web developer working on front-end technologies, so most of the time I'm using JavaScript and HTML in a text editor, using a terminal. Even knowing all of those things, or not knowing all those things, it doesn't really matter too much. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, you don't need to know these things, it can just sometimes help. Even then, it's quite easy to learn these things when you need to use them. And you're not going to need to use them straight away. And even if you are, there'll be lots of guides and lots of help. Lots of people have hit these problems before. I learned terminal commands only a few years ago, really. Another thing that people believe is that development is a thing that you do alone. I think this comes from movies, where they always portray developers and hackers as some kind of loner who sits in a shed or a garage or in a cellar in a darkened room, just coding and hacking the system. That's not really how development actually works. Development, generally speaking, is lots of people all working together trying to solve a problem. These are things that I will introduce properly in later videos, but things like pair programming, code reviews, mob development, are all things that you can use as a developer working together to solve problems. So I've run through what I think development isn't and myths around that. Maybe I should run through what I think development is. At its core, development is problem solving. Generally speaking, the best way to solve a problem is to talk through it with people who have diverse opinions and diverse ideas on how to solve that problem. Being able to read some code that you might not have written by somebody maybe even years ago, who might not have even understood the language very well, is a key thing to be able to do. Another important thing is the ability to think logically about a big problem. And by that I mean being able to break it down into smaller components and solve those problems instead. Small problems are much more easy to manage and solve. They're much more easy to test. An added benefit of that is that you can then combine those smaller solutions to smaller problems together in other ways to solve other problems, potentially. For example, NASA didn't just build a rocket, they started out by building smaller parts of a rocket that they then fitted together to make a rocket. Another important thing is analytical thinking. The reason for this is that it allows people to quickly work out solutions to the problem that are more effective than others. In summary, I think development is something anyone can learn. Don't let what I've said put you off. You can work on solo projects, knowing maths, knowing IT. But I think that a lot of people view this industry like you have to have those things, and that is just not the case. Above all else, give it a try. The worst you'll find out is that it's not something for you, and if that's the case, then hell, you learned something. The best case might be that you learn that you do like it, and in that case, feel free to watch more of these videos. I want this channel to become a community where people can teach and people can learn to become developers. I want this to be an ongoing conversation where you learn or you help other people to learn. I really look forward to hearing from everyone about what they did and didn't like about this video, so please leave a comment below.